The whistle of a bullet right above his ear snapped into a short, vicious crack of air. Carter instinctively jerked his head, burying his face in a hot slurry of dust and fine gravel. He spat out sand that instantly turned into a dry, gritty paste on his tongue. The air wasn't merely hot. It scorched his lungs with every breath, like molten lead poured down his throat. He pressed himself harder into the base of the wall, feeling the unreliable warmth of the old masonry against his back. Another bullet kicked up a fountain of clay crumbs just a meter from his temple. The dust raised by the crossfire clogged his nostrils, making it hard to breathe and forcing his eyes to water. 5, status! The radio on his shoulder barked so suddenly that Carter flinched. The commander's voice broke through a thick layer of static and the crackle of distant explosions, sounding unnaturally mechanical. "Pinned down on the very edge," Carter shouted back, keeping his head down. Opposite him, across the doorway behind a pile of rubble, crouched Private Miller. His fingers, smeared with oil and soot, trembled as he frantically racked his bolt. "We've got more empty mags than full ones. If they push again, we have nothing to welcome them with." Lucas, positioned by the window deep inside the room, looked nothing like a living human being at that moment. In the twilight of the abandoned house, he resembled a plaster mannequin left behind during an evacuation. His posture was flawlessly static, his back straight, and the rifle rested in his hands as if it were an extension of his bones. Only his eyes remained alive, sharp, feverishly bright, continuously scanning the area outside. He smoothly pushed the carbine's barrel out, catching the moment. A short, dry burst ripped through the stifling air. Outside, somewhere beyond the veil of kicked-up sand, a dull thud echoed. Someone dropped like a sack onto the scorching stones without even a cry. And suddenly, the firing stopped. As if on an invisible cue, the enemy ceased fire. A silence fell that was far more terrifying than the whistle of bullets. The birds that had just been circling over the ruins vanished, as if erased from the horizon. Only the heat remained, heavy, tangible, pressing down on their shoulders like an invisible weight. Then came the sound. At first, it was a barely noticeable tremor that could be mistaken for the beating of one's own heart in the ears. But it grew, originating somewhere deep beneath the rocky ridges surrounding the valley. The ground beneath their boots began to shake. The rising vibration traveled from the floor to their knees, climbing higher, echoing with a dull ache in their joints. It wasn't the roar of an engine or the hum of machinery. This low, guttural grinding felt like the sound of reality itself being torn apart. "What the hell is that?" Lucas whispered. His usually steady voice broke. He slowly lowered his weapon, completely forgetting about the enemy that could be hiding behind any boulder. The sky above them began to change. The blue faded, twisting into an unnatural vortex with a pitch-black center. A tiny dot fell from this void, swelling in fractions of a second into a colossal shadow. Hovering over the houses, blotting out the sun, was a matte black block. It looked like something with no right to exist in the physical world. Not a single seam, nozzle, or window. Bare, terrifying geometry, devoid of flaws. 300 meters of monolith hung motionless in the air. The low, vibrating hum it emitted shattered the glass simultaneously throughout the entire village, showering the floor with myriads of transparent needles. Whitewash and age-old dust poured heavily from the ceiling, obscuring their vision in a white veil. Carter gripped his rifle so tightly his knuckles turned white. The massive structure in the sky crushed his consciousness, evoking a primal, irrational terror.
It was an alien,
absolutely dead thing, its scale defying human comprehension. "Move out!" Lucas suddenly barked, snapping out of his stupor. He jumped to his brother and forcefully grabbed his shoulder, shaking him. "Danny, snap out of it! Move, damn it! We can't stay here!" The shadow from the monolith completely covered the village, plunging it into artificial twilight. The air, which had been scorching a minute ago, abruptly cooled. The temperature plummeted so rapidly that thick steam plumed from the soldiers' mouths. The ground heaved beneath them, no longer just trembling, but rolling in waves. The walls of the house groaned, covered in deep cracks, as if the building itself was trying to shrink and hide from whatever hovered above the roof. Clay crumbled, and heavy stones began to fall from the masonry, foreshadowing an imminent collapse. It grew so cold that frost began to form on the scorching barrels of their rifles. The air in Zone 0A turned into a dense, suffocating suspension of soot, stone dust, and acrid static ash. Carter didn't blink. The biting dust clogged his eyelids, and the unnatural frost, appearing out of nowhere in the 40-degree Afghan heat, bound his eyelashes, turning every eye movement into torture. Over the Hindu Kush, tearing apart the familiar geometry of the mountains, hovered the black monolith. It had no edges, no reflections, only an absolute dead void in space, sucking the light from the surrounding world. Reality itself seemed to thin around it, turning into gray ash. The low-frequency hum, seemingly originating from the planet's core, abruptly shifted into an unbearable ultrasonic shriek. Thick, dark blood pulsed from Carter's nose. He clutched his helmet with both hands, trying to hold his skull together as it felt ready to crack under the pressure of the resonating, hostile power. "Back!" Lucas yelled, his voice barely breaking through the solid wall of noise. "To the canal! Fast, Danny!" His brother yanked him by the strap of his tactical vest so hard the nylon seams tore, literally tearing Daniel out of his paralysis. They sprinted away from the headquarters building, which was already beginning to crumble into clouds of gray dust beneath the invisible weight of gravitational pressure. Every step required colossal effort. Their boots bogged down in deep dust, instantly frozen by the sudden cold into a fragile crust. Behind them, a crunch echoed, as if the celestial sphere itself had burst, exposing the black underside of existence. Daniel looked back on the run, defying instinct and common sense. A thin, piercing blue beam struck the APC parked at the gates. The vehicle didn't explode or blow to pieces. It instantly turned white, lost its contours, and melted like a wax figure in an oven. Multi-ton steel turned into a hissing puddle of slag in seconds. The air around crackled with static discharges, making the hair stand up under their helmets and their skin itch. "Don't look!" Lucas shouted, backhanding his brother on the shoulder to keep him moving. The anger in his voice mixed with primal terror. "Run, Danny! Don't you dare stop!" They flew past the remains of an ancient adobe wall, which was crumbling into sand from the rising vibration. The other soldiers of the squad, whose faces and names now seemed erased from memory by this merciless blue radiance, scattered in different directions, disappearing into the smoke. Someone screamed, mouth wide open, but the sound was cut off, swallowed by the vacuum-like silence pulsing around the monolith. The heavy, oily stench of burning wiring and a massive amount of ionized quartz filled their lungs, making it impossible to take a full breath. Lucas slammed the brakes at the edge of the irrigation ditch, a deep drainage canal choked with sharp stones. His face was covered in a layer of granite dust. His skin had taken on an unhealthy, leaden hue, and his eyes held a cold, resolute gleam that Daniel had never seen before. "Jump!" Lucas grabbed him in a death grip by the collar of his jacket, dragging him to the very edge of the precipice. "We have to go together!" Daniel tried to grab his brother's arm, his elbow, but his fingers slipped helplessly off the bloody, sweat and dust-soaked sleeve. "Lucas, we jump together! Grab on!" "Jump, damn you! That's an order!" At that moment, the monolith above them shifted. The massive black block tilted smoothly, as if selecting a new, more worthy target. A blue light on its lower base began to pulse, swelling with deadly brightness, prepping the next discharge. The air around them quivered and rippled like heat over hot asphalt, distorting the proportions of the world and turning the mountains into a hazy mirage. Lucas shoved Daniel in the back with a force no ordinary human was capable of. He went flying downward into a pile of sharp rubble and foul garbage at the bottom of the canal. The next second, the sky over the edge of the ditch vanished. It was replaced by a blinding azure flash that burned his retinas even through tightly squeezed eyelids and hands pressed against his face. The fabric on his back began to smoke, an unbearable, dry heat spreading across his skin. Carter pressed himself into the stones, trying to merge with the dirt. The earth beneath him shuddered and sank. Above, a granite boulder cracked dryly, showering him with fine gravel and shards. It became unnaturally, terrifyingly quiet. Only the wheezing in his own lungs and the frantic pounding of his heart in his ears reminded him he was still alive. He forced himself to open his eyes. Huge crimson spots floated before his face, and his body refused to obey, pinned down by a layer of rubble blown from the walls of the ditch. He lay at the very bottom, staring into the narrow strip of sky above. The massive shadow of the monolith crept slowly, majestically, over the canal, finally covering Daniel in a shroud of cold darkness. The air above him vibrated with unbearable power, and then, without a single sound, the pressure vanished, as if a giant press had been switched off. The shadow melted instantly, as if it had never been there, and the merciless, indifferent light of the Afghan sun poured back into the bottom of the ditch. Silence. On the edge of the canal, where his brother had stood a second ago, there was only melted stone turned to glass, rising with acrid blue smoke. Ahead lay 4 years of absolute ringing emptiness. The high-frequency whine of the drill bit into his occipital bone, making his very consciousness shudder from the unbearable resonance. Daniel Carter couldn't scream. His jaws were securely fixed by a cold steel retractor, and his mouth was so dry his tongue stuck to his palate. His body, strapped to the operating table with wide, coarse nylon belts, arched like a bow as another pulse of pain shot through his spine. The paralytic compound, injected into his vein 10 minutes before the start, robbed him of movement but left his nerve endings exposed and hypersensitive. The pain didn't cut, it pressed, displacing the remnants of coherent thought from his skull with a heavy, pulsating weight. The bay stank of antiseptic, burnt bone, and stagnant ozone. The hum of the life support systems merged into a monotonous, maddening background noise. The ceiling lamps blinded him, turning everything around into a sterile white haze that erased even shadows. Above Daniel's head, the manipulators of the automated surgeon moved rhythmically, resembling the legs of a metal spider. "Barrett, 52nd. Captain Hayes's voice sounded from somewhere to the side. Dry, routine, as if he were encouraging a recruit on a morning run, rather than observing a vivisection. Daniel strained his eyes as far as the restraints allowed. Hayes stood frozen by the tall monitor racks, arms crossed. His face, a piece of tanned, scar-creased leather, showed not a drop of sympathy. To him, this wasn't an operation. This was routine equipment maintenance before deploying an asset. "Installation of the Link-S neural interface is 80% complete," reported the mechanical, inflectionless voice of the surgical assistant. "Initiating the neural spike integration phase. Connecting pain blockers is not viable due to the risk of conflict with the cognitive matrix." A sharp, dry click echoed. Thin graphene needles entered the base of his skull, straight into the medulla oblongata. Daniel vaulted on the table, the belts biting into his shoulders, nearly snapping under the force of the convulsion. A flash of blinding white light exploded before his eyes. His vision was instantly flooded with cascades of green code and swarming symbols of an unknown alphabet. He saw his vitals as if they were burned onto his retina. Heart rate, 145. Blood pressure, 165/110. Adrenaline levels off the charts, painting the graphs a concerning crimson. Information flowed in a powerful stream straight down his optic nerve, layering over reality and turning the world into an overloaded schematic. Hayes stepped closer, his heavy footsteps echoing in Daniel's head like hammer blows. The captain unrolled an electronic tablet and, ignoring his ward's convulsions, began reading the order in a cold, official tone. Based on the Stirk protocol dated January 12, 2029, Private Daniel Carter is declared biologically incapacitated due to injuries incompatible with life. All citizen rights are annulled. As of this second, you are enrolled in the Digital Guard Special Forces Unit on an indefinite basis. The captain paused, leaning down so low that Daniel felt his heavy breath. Hayes looked straight into 50 seconds' dilated, pain-filled pupils. "Your name has been erased from all government archives. You have no past, no family, no brother. You are Object 52, a combat unit of the corporation." Daniel tried to inhale to spit out a curse, but his lungs no longer belonged to him. They obeyed only the mechanical rhythm of the ventilator, which hissed as it pumped oxygen into his chest. In his memory, spurred by the neural chip's electrical discharges, flashed that very vortex in the Afghan mountains. The blinding blue light striking from the rift. The melted stone turned to glass. And Lucas, his brother's face twisted in terror before silence swallowed him. Lucas wasn't killed. He wasn't blown apart by a shell. He was simply erased into dust, just as Daniel himself was being erased now. This furious, burning thought was the only thing keeping him from dying completely on this table. "Synchronization complete," reported the medic technician, stepping away from the headboard and wiping his serum-stained gloves. "Biometric stabilizing. No tissue rejection detected. The Link-S system is in the active phase." The belts on his wrists and ankles clicked synchronously and parted. Daniel slowly, as if in a dream, lowered his hands to the cold surface of the table. The skin beneath his fingers felt alien, insensitive, as if he had put on a thick, tight-fitting rubber suit that had become his new shell. He sat on the edge of the table. His head was filled with lead, his nape pulsing with a heavy, viscous ache. In that same second, the neural chip registered the discomfort and injected a massive dose of synthetic analgesic into his bloodstream. The pain retreated, replaced by icy calm and a strange, frightening clarity of perception. "Stand up," Hayes commanded. Daniel complied. His legs trembled, threatening to buckle. But the external exoskeleton, anchored to his thighs and shins, straight through the skin to the bone, engaged instantly. The servos whirred quietly, barely audibly, compensating for the weakness of atrophied muscles and holding his body in perfect equilibrium. A tactical window popped up on the retina of his right eye. A green frame highlighted the captain's figure, providing a brief summary. Object, ally. Status, commander. Access level, highest. We spent 4 years putting you back together piece by piece in this lab, 52nd. Hayes stepped close, radiating the smell of strong tobacco and cheap army coffee. The corporation spent more on your upgrade than an entire battalion of contract infantry costs. Don't make me regret the expense. You are the tip of the spear now. Daniel inspected his palms. Beneath the pale skin of his forearms, the composite fiber threads reinforcing his ligaments were distinctly black. The human inside him was officially over. The weapon had begun. "Where are they?" Daniel's voice was hoarse, deep, and completely unrecognizable. The speakers implanted in his throat distorted the timbre, giving it an unnatural metallic edge resonating right in his chest. "They're coming back." Hayes turned to the armored window, beyond which the endless, dark blackwood proving ground lay in the pre-dawn twilight, littered with targets and the husks of burned-out vehicles. Afghanistan was just the beginning. Recon. Now they've sent the Reapers, and we need to know how to kill them. And you need to remember what it tastes like. A new notification blinked on Daniel's tactical display, accompanied by a short beep right in his ear canal. Mission updated. Target, Blackwood Proving Ground. Status, preparing for deployment. Deep in his skull, where Link S now ruled supreme, a barely audible hum was born. The same low-frequency hum he had heard before the blast in Zone 0A. The sound of tearing reality, vibrating in the bones. The hunt had begun, but now the beast they had created knew how to bite much harder than its creators. Daniel activated the Neuralink. A cold click at the base of his skull echoed with a burst of data. His new voice, distorted by synthesizers, was no longer dependent on the rhythm of the ventilator. In the dropship's troop compartment, it smelled of heated metal and hydraulic fluid. The 9 kilograms of carbine in his hands felt weightless. The Atlas exoskeleton took the load upon itself, turning 52nd into a part of the weapons system. Cascades of Link S data flashed on his retina. Greenish columns of numbers, biometric graphs. Everything normal, pulse steady, 72 beats per minute. 19th, sitting opposite, maintained absolute stillness while his heavy armor plates clanged against each other with every jolt of the aircraft. In the dim red standby light of the cabin, his visor looked like a dried bloodstain. 5 minutes to the drop zone. Captain Hayes' voice sounded straight in the bones of his skull, cutting through the monotonous, exhausting hum of the turbines. Objective, a 50-kilometer forced march to the extraction point. We go in full radio silence mode. Comms check complete. A sharp bank made his stomach drop. Beyond the narrow porthole, the Appalachians blurred past, an endless sea of dark green pine and gray rock. The craft dropped aggressively, clipping the tops of ancient pines. There had been no roads here for decades, only sharp stones and wet, glossy ferns hidden beneath a layer of dense fog. "Exiting one by one," Hayes commanded, standing up and gripping a handrail. 52nd, you're up first. Go! The hatch clanged open with a drawn-out groan of metal. The compartment was instantly hit by dampness and the sharp smell of rotting foliage. 52nd stepped off the ramp into the gray muck without hesitation. The hydraulic shock absorbers on his shins absorbed the impact with the ground. His knees barely bent. The servos worked flawlessly, hissing quietly as they balanced the 80 kilos of gear and the soldier's own weight. Mud splattered everywhere, plastering the optical sensors on his boots. Sector 11 o'clock. The squad scattered like drops of mercury. 41st vanished into the tall grass like a silent shadow. 73rd paused for a moment, activating his 360-degree sensors. "Squad, wedge formation," Hayes commanded through the neural net. Words weren't necessary. Link S broadcast the tactical schematic and the captain's order straight into the soldier's visual cortex. The first step into the thicket echoed with a dry, unnaturally loud crunch of branches under heavy boots. The forest was terrifyingly dead. No cry of a night bird, no rustle of a rodent, not even the whisper of wind in the canopy. Only the muffled bass hum of servos behind his back. Daniel felt the neural chip at the base of his skull heat up, running at full capacity and processing colossal data streams from the helmet's external sensors. Air temperature, +12. Humidity, 85%. Suddenly, the image on the tactical display twitched and swam. The perfectly sharp green grid lines briefly gave way to chaotic crimson bands of interference, resembling jagged scars. The speakers inside the helmet erupted with a sharp, high-frequency crackle. Carter gritted his teeth, squinting from the sharp, cutting pain in his ears. 73rd, check the channel, 52nd transmitted via the neural net, trying to ignore the throbbing in his temples. "I'm getting interference, coming through all layers." "Me too, 52nd, the engineer replied. His voice sounded hollow and tense through the white noise. "It's not an equipment failure. I checked the logs. The signal is coming from outside. Unknown frequency, very high amplitude. Looks like a directional scan, but the source, it's everywhere." 52nd froze, raising a Kevlar-gloved hand. The squad instantly fanned out, the soldiers turning into motionless statues behind the tree trunks. He slowly turned around, looking towards where the outlines of the mountains were hidden in the fog. The hum he had initially mistaken for the turbines of the departing dropship hadn't vanished. On the contrary, it had transformed into that same viscous tremor 52nd remembered from the events 4 years ago. The sound was like Afghanistan a second before the mountains started collapsing from a shaped charge. 41st, do you see anything?" he requested, peering into the gray veil. "Clear," the sniper answered shortly, her breathing through the mask filter sounding accelerated. "Just fog and pines, but 52nd, there are no animals here. My thermal imager doesn't see a single living soul within a 1-kilometer radius. Not even insects. Absolute silence." Something crunched under his boot, differently than a dry branch. Carter looked down. Lying in the rich black mud was a shard of white plastic, covered in a thick layer of frost. Ice crystals sparkled in the beam of his underbarrel flashlight. At +12 degrees, it looked like an impossible physical anomaly. "Keep moving," Hayes ordered. Irritation was audible in his voice. The captain disliked delays and mysticism. 52nd adjusted his grip on the rifle and pushed forward. The animal instinct preserved somewhere deep beneath layers of electronics screamed backward, demanding he flee this forest. But the order hardwired into his consciousness overrode the fear. The crackle in his headset intensified, turning into a rhythmic, oppressive pounding. Link S was completely choked with static. The interface before his eyes blinked with a red error warning. The group slowly, step by step, dissolved into the creeping fog. 52nd moved through the thicket, fighting the resistance of his servos. Link S continued to glitch. The tactical map completely dissolved into a mess of static. Unknown radiation was aggressively hacking military ciphers, blinding the system.
52nd, keep up,
Hayes wheezed over the link. The commander's voice was riddled with static, as if he were speaking from underwater. 52nd shifted the carbine, adjusting it in his numb hands. His fingers in their tactical gloves barely felt the ribbed grip, which had become an extension of his own body. Ahead, about 10 meters away, 41st suddenly froze, as if she'd hit an invisible wall. She dropped smoothly to one knee, throwing up her left hand in a silent command. The squad instantly dispersed, taking up positions. 52nd pressed himself against the trunk of an old pine, feeling the rough bark crumble under the weight of his shoulder. The exoskeleton trembled almost imperceptibly in time with the soldier's ragged, heavy breathing. "Contact?" 19th requested briefly, almost in a whisper. His figure was barely visible in the gray gloom. He had already leveled his heavy railgun at the thick, impenetrable wall of fog, which seemed to be watching them itself. "No, look at the clearing." 41st pointed her rifle barrel forward toward a strange break in the dense forest. The soldier stepped out into the open space slowly, maintaining distance. The forest here simply ceased to exist in the conventional sense. Ancient pines were uprooted, like matchsticks in the hands of an angry giant. The trunks were pulverized into fine splinters, which were now gripped by a strange, unnaturally white frost. 52nd took a cautious step forward, the sole of his boot crushing an ice-covered branch with a sharp, dry snap. The smell of soot and burnt organics seeped through his helmet filters. Right in the center of this zone of total destruction, the earth had sunk deeply. 52nd approached the very edge and, keeping his weapon ready, looked down. A crater almost a meter deep yawned before him. It wasn't a random blast crater. It was a geometrically perfect footprint. 3 massive toes spreading out like a fan. The bottom smoked with thick blue-gray fumes. Dense, trembling steam hung over the soil. "This isn't machinery," 73rd whispered, lowering his scanner into the smoking crater. "No tracks? No supports? One step. Like a colossus walked through here." The device in his hands beeped frantically, bathing his gloves in orange light. 400 millisieverts and climbing. Isotope signature unidentified. "Captain, if this is a drill, they dropped us into a decay epicenter without warning." "Stow the panic." Hayes walked to the very edge of the crater, his massive shadow falling over the melted ground. He touched the edge of a rock, turned into a chunk of cloudy gray glass with his glove. 73rd, keep taking readings. 19th, 41st, perimeter defense. 52nd, check the edges of the clearing. Look for any entry or exit tracks. 52nd moved along the fractured edge of fallen trees. He saw how the ions in the supersaturated air made his tactical interface flicker and ghost. The dust kicked up by the unknown object still hung in the air like a motionless, dead suspension, defying the gusts of wind. He bent down to pick up a piece of charred bark and froze. The hum arose suddenly, as if from inside reality itself. The ground beneath his feet bucked, pushing the exoskeleton's gyroscopes to their limits just to maintain balance. A sharp, metallic taste bloomed in his mouth, a sure sign of a massive electromagnetic disturbance. "It's getting stronger!" yelled 19th, throwing up his railgun and swinging the barrel wildly from side to side, trying to catch a target. "You hear that? That sound! It's everywhere!" "Acoustics are still totally empty," 41st responded, frantically checking the readouts on her wrist sensors. "No sound waves in the audible range, just this damned silence." "It's crushing the sensors." "Because it's not a sound." 52nd slowly tilted his head up toward the leaden sky, feeling the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. "It's a force field of colossal power. It's literally grinding the atmosphere." Above their heads, the dense, impenetrable layer of clouds began moving chaotically. The clouds twisted into a colossal vortex, resembling the eye of a giant cyclops. The hum became rhythmic, heavy, echoing with physical pain in the ribcage. Space itself around them seemed to grind like metal on metal. "Everyone prep! Weapons ready!" Hayes's voice cut through the radio feed sharply, breaking through the static bursts. 41st, 19th, lock down the sectors! Copy, 52nd replied. But instead of watching the perimeter, he aimed at the very center of the cloud vortex, instantly shifting into deep tactical analysis mode. "Captain, forget the perimeter. Threat is at zenith. That's a Reaper signature, identical to the classified reports from Zone 0A. Gravity core right above us. We are in focus." His skin prickled unbearably from the rising static. The clouds were illuminated from within by a sickly blue glow. The source of the sound, which seemed to melt thoughts themselves, was hiding somewhere up high. The hum built to an unbearable roar, and 52nd realized with terrifying clarity the thing that left the footprint was hovering right above them, hidden by the veil of fog and distorted gravity, preparing for its second step. Link S didn't just squeal. It pierced his cerebral cortex with red-hot needles, burning out his neural circuits. Carter clawed at his helmet with both hands, trying to rip it off, but his fingers merely scraped helplessly against the composite. A white flash erupted in his eyes, burning his retinas. For a moment, reality splintered, turning into a patchwork quilt of nightmares. The damp blackwood forest vanished, replaced by the scorching ruins of the Hindu Kush. A sharp, nauseatingly familiar smell of soot, old dust, and diesel fuel hit his nose. Carter gasped convulsively, expecting scorching sand, but familiar dampness rushed into his lungs, the heavy, rot-soaked scent of a swampy lowland. His consciousness slowly glued the two lives together into one bloody mess. "System failure. Critical overload," he wheezed, trying to focus on the tactical interface, which now merely flickered erratically. A heavy metallic crash rang out from the right. 73rd dropped to his knees, dropping the heavy frequency scanner from his weakened hands. The device hit the rocks and hissed, emitting a thin stream of blue-gray smoke. From beneath the engineer's sealed helmet, a thick, blue-black substance slowly leaked. It was synthetic blood mixed with cerebral fluid. 73rd wheezed, clenching his teeth so hard that the enamel cracked. The heavy drops soaked into the emerald moss, leaving toxic, scorched stains. 73rd, status! Report your condition! Hayes crossed the distance separating them in 2 bounds and grabbed his subordinate's shoulder in a death grip, trying to keep him conscious. "The signal. Captain, it's not just jamming. It's burning out the channels. From the inside." The engineer lifted his head with difficulty. His pupils dilated to the limit, completely hiding his irises and turning his eyes into 2 bottomless black sinkholes. "There is no more comms. Not just with command. The link can't see the satellites. We got cut out of the net. We are in a vacuum, Hayes. In absolute void." Carter, meanwhile, tried to reboot his visor. The system obediently displayed a boot log, but the tactical map immediately crumbled into a myriad of chaotic pixels. The navigator went insane, demanding an immediate turn toward a sheer cliff. It claimed a flat plateau was there, but ahead lay only a steep slope overgrown with thorny brush. The program code lied. and this lie was deadly. Hayes didn't wait for a response from the systems. He ripped at the radio push-to-talk on his shoulder as if trying to tear it out by the roots. "Base, this is Tower 1. Requesting coordinate confirmation and sector telemetry. We have a critical navigation failure and our neural links are overloaded. How copy? Over." The radio didn't just return static. It howled like a wounded animal. A sharp, rhythmic sound suddenly cut through the white noise. It was a guttural, mechanical hum that made their teeth vibrate. Carter froze. He had heard this before. 5 years ago, during the Kandahar incident, it happened seconds before his brother's position was hit by an unknown pulse that erased all life within a 1-mile radius. "Turn that crap off!" 19th barked, pressing his palms to his helmet. "My brains are boiling! That sound! It's right inside my skull!" The captain released the switch with a curse. The feed died completely, leaving them in the deafening silence of the forest. The fog seemed to grow even thicker. It literally devoured the beams of their tactical flashlights. "To the ledge! Move!" Hayes snapped, regaining his command voice. 73rd, get up, unless you want to rot here." The engineer wiped his face with his bloody sleeve. Carter grabbed him by the elbow, helping him stand. The exoskeleton's servos trembled, indicating unstable voltage. The squad moved upward, slipping on wet rocks and getting tangled in roots. Carter's visor continued drawing phantoms. It seemed to him that shadows flickered between the trees, shadows that did not show up on the thermals. The thermal imager screen turned into a flat, gray canvas. The surrounding temperature plummeted rapidly, and the air became prickly and dry, which was impossible at these latitudes. Suddenly, 41st's status blinked red in his peripheral vision and went out. The sniper, who walked in the rear guard, simply vanished. Carter turned around, but he saw only the gray gloom. In the next second, a flash erupted in the ravine behind them. A white pillar of blinding, unearthly light struck from the low clouds, piercing the gloom. Night turned into a deathly pale, shadowless day for a moment. The ancient pines at the epicenter of the flash didn't catch fire. They simply crumbled into gray ash, holding their shape for only a fraction of a second. The light vanished as abruptly as it appeared. Then came the wave. A front of compressed, scorching air knocked their breath away and threw the men onto the rocks. The rock beneath their feet shuddered like a living creature caught in a trap. "This is no drill." 19th was the first to jump to his feet, gripping his assault rifle until his knuckles cracked. "Hayes, mother of God, what was that?" The captain remained silent, staring at the dead tablet screen crawling with interference bands. The Reapers marked the sector. Squad number was left in a blind spot, cut off from the world and from hope. The hunt had begun, and they were not the hunters. 41st, status! Hayes shouted the command out loud. His voice, stripped of its usual neural network digital modulation, sounded strangely thin and hollow in the heavy, frozen forest air. After the flash, internal comms still hadn't revived, answering only with a dead, static crackle. No response followed. The sniper, who held the flank position seconds before the blast, seemed to dissolve into the gray gloom of the fog. 73rd, do you see her marker? Check the tactical layer. An ancient pine cracked with a deafening snap above their heads. A heavy body in an Atlas exoskeleton smashed through the dense pine needles, breaking branches, and crashed at the roots with a dull, bone-crushing thud. The heavy rifle slipped from loosened fingers and clanged against a granite boulder. Daniel Carter dropped to one knee, hiding behind a rock outcropping. His Link S visor continued going crazy, throwing up cascades of garbage data. Crimson core critical error icons pulsed on the edges of his vision, directly on his retina. The sector map turned into a mess of static noise and scrambled coordinates. The neural chip at the base of his skull pulsed with searing heat, threatening to burn out his synapses. His skull felt crushed by an invisible press, striking sparks from his eyes. The mountain frost choked his lungs, and the steam escaping his mouth settled as frost on the inside of his protective glass, obstructing his view. There was no muzzle flash, and no sound of detonation. He heard only a sharp, dry thud, like a whip crack. A black, lusterless shard of unknown material stuck out of 41st's chest. She was dead before her body even hit the ground. 41st! 19th barked. An undisguised fury bled into his voice through the helmet speakers. The assault trooper didn't wait for orders or a situational assessment. He jumped to full height, throwing the heavy railgun to his shoulder. The massive barrel howled as its magnetic coils spun up. With short, dry pops, tungsten needles sheared through the fog. The ancient trees ahead splintered, turning into clouds of wood dust and debris. "Contact! I see movement at 12 o'clock!" 19th continued to hose the forest thicket with a tungsten squall, sweeping the barrel from side to side and mowing down the underbrush. Daniel, overcoming the nausea from his glitching chip, sprinted toward the sniper's body. He slipped on the wet moss, nearly slamming into a fallen tree trunk. 41st lay on her back. Her head was twisted unnaturally. The black needle embedded in her chest still smoked. It emitted an acrid chemical smell and slowly ate through the composite breastplate. Through the ragged hole, a gruesome mess of shredded muscle, artificial fibers, and sparking exoskeleton drives was visible. His visor cleared for a moment, displaying a dry epitaph. Object 41. Vital signs absent. Death. "Fall back! To cover! Move!" Hayes lunged forward, grabbed 19th by the exoskeleton's pauldron, and yanked him hard, dragging him behind a rock outcropping. "You are shooting at nothing, idiot! Stop! They already shifted position!" "Where did the shot come from?" Carter pressed himself into the frozen earth next to the captain, feeling a fine tremor shake his fingers. "I didn't see a flash. My sensors are dead, Hayes. No thermal signatures, no acoustics." "Because it's not a bullet, and it's not plasma, 52nd. Hayes frantically switched his visor to direct environment density analysis mode, ignoring the system overload warnings. "It's a kinetically accelerated gravity round. It leaves no thermal wake, and it doesn't push air in front of it. They fire from above, at an angle." Daniel looked up, and what he saw made his heart skip a beat. Above the forest, hidden by dense, impossibly heavy clouds, hung an absolute, unnatural darkness. It wasn't a cloud. It was more like a sinkhole in space that swallowed light. The fog around them began twisting into slow spirals, as if an invisible vortex sucked it in right above their heads. Breathing grew harder with every second. The air rapidly thinned, causing ringing in their ears and bouts of sharp nausea. Suddenly, 19th froze and slowly lowered his railgun. His helmet, caked in soot and mud, slowly turned toward the thicket where his lead storm had just raged. "Do you hear that?" he whispered. His voice, usually gruff and confident, now trembled with a primal, irrational terror that no military psyche conditioner could suppress. A crackle echoed in their ears. It wasn't a sound, but rather a sensation of an alien presence inside the skull. The visor flooded with a cascade of interference, turning reality into a trembling negative. The neural chip scorched his brain with hostile, alien code that tried to crack the security protocols. His vision swam, splitting into dozens of colored shadows. They aren't just hunting us. Daniel gripped his carbine's handle so hard his tactical gloves crunched pitifully. They are scanning us, straight through the neural links. They are downloading our data. From above, through the veil of clouds, a second black object dropped without a single sound. It was significantly larger than the first needle. It was a massive, faceted cone, and its edges appeared carved from the night itself. It plunged silently into the dirt just 15 feet from the squad. The earth beneath it instantly vitrified, turning into a smooth mirror of obsidian. The grass shattered underfoot with the sound of breaking crystal crumbling into ice dust. "Scatter!" Hayes shoved the men in different directions when the air around the cone began to vibrate. 73rd, huddled in the shadow of a boulder, spat thick blood and clutched his terminal. He tried to raise some sort of electronic shield. 19th, succumbing to panic, unleashed another burst into the fog. Needles shrieked, shearing leaves and biting into rock. But where he aimed, there was only emptiness and slowly thickening gloom. "Look, damn you, look!" 73rd wheezed, choking on a dry, hacking cough. His fingers, smeared with machine grease and dried blood, trembled. He slammed a bony fist into the dented side panel of the portable terminal, as if he tried to physically squeeze data out of the glitching hardware. Daniel flinched when the Link S tactical interface suddenly flared to life, sparking sharp pain at the base of his skull. This wasn't a standard connection through the command node. The engineer crudely live-wired the security protocols, force broadcasting raw data from the surviving terminal straight into the neural nets of the other soldiers. A toxic grid of static flared before Carter's eyes, blinding him for a moment. But a ghostly, trembling window of a 3D projection immediately replaced it. The world around them lost its color, turning into a faded gray outline. This was how the LiDAR perceived reality through the dense fog. A crimson dot pulsed in this ghostly space. It was the only bright object in the dead zone. It wasn't walking, it was flying, eerily and smoothly ignoring the laws of inertia and the density of the underbrush. The dot ate up distance at jagged angles impossible for a living creature. It moved in jerks that the human eye would refuse to register. 200 miles an hour! The engineer shrieked through the static. "It's not walking, it's gliding! No thrust, no exhaust! It simply cuts itself out of space and pastes itself back in." Daniel pressed the carbine stock harder into his shoulder, feeling the metal cool his cheek through his balaclava. His finger hovered over the safety, but the tactical computer remained silent, displaying a targeting error. The thermal imager built into his helmet showed a flat, absolutely cold background of the night forest. To standard infrared sensors, this creature simply didn't exist. It was colder than the rocks surrounding it, colder than space itself. "Where is the thermal trail?" barked 19th. His voice over the shared comms channel sounded like metal scraping on glass. He swung the heavy, humming barrel of the railgun, frantically trying to catch the invisible target. 73rd, give me a lock! My sights are empty! I am shooting into nothing! "It's not there!" the engineer shouted back, and undisguised hysteria broke into his voice. "This piece of trash isn't emitting energy! It's eating it! All my sensors are dropping below zero! Do you understand? It's sucking the heat out of the air, out of the trees, out of us!" Carter felt it on his skin before his suit sensors triggered. The temperature inside the helmet plummeted rapidly. The exoskeleton's life support howled, straining to compensate for the sharp, unnatural freeze. But the heating elements burned out, choking on their own impotence. The air around the soldiers solidified, turning into a thick gel. The ancient ferns at their feet frosted over with a white crust before their eyes and crumbled into ice shavings. Whitish frost devoured the bark of ancient pines in seconds, turning living wood into fragile crystal. Daniel watched through his visor as his own fingers inside the tactical gloves went numb, losing sensation. 52nd, look at the absorption log. 73rd pushed a live energy consumption graph onto Carter's retina. The numbers spiraled downward in a frantic dance. Energy crashed towards zero. The main batteries died right before his eyes. The charge melted away 1% a second. The creature wasn't just nearby. It sucked the charge directly from the shielded power packs of the exoskeletons, bypassing all defenses. "It is circling us," Daniel whispered, feeling the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. "It is tightening the spiral. It is hunting." The dot on the display jumped through the thicket, instantly crossing 30 feet. There was no inertia, no rustling of leaves. The object, roughly 3 times the mass of a human, moved through the dense forest in absolute silence, like a movie projection. 19th, do not shoot, Carter ordered. He noticed on his indicators that the trooper switched his railgun capacitors to maximum output. "You will just give away our exact position. It tracks energy spikes. Every shot you take is like a flare in absolute darkness to it." "We are already sitting ducks!" 19th snapped. His breathing sounded heavy and wheezed over the comms. "Look at the scanner! It knows where we are! It isn't searching for us, Carter. It is just playing with us, like a cat with a pinned mouse." The projection suddenly froze. The target stopped 130 feet from their position, right behind a wall of dense brush. Suddenly, violet ionization flared there. The air around the dot began to glow with a sickly light. A vacuum. "The link system. I am dropping data packets," 73rd rasped. The sound of his voice warped into digital static. It's trying to enter our closed channel. Hayes, it is breaking the encryption from the inside. It is in my head." "Sever external ports immediately," Hayes commanded, but it was too late. A cascade of crimson symbols suddenly flooded Daniel's visor. They overlapped each other to form maddening patterns. It wasn't human code, and it wasn't machine logic. The symbols moved and pulsed like living organisms. The code burned into his retina, leaving black spots. The neural chip at the base of his skull boiled over, triggering a flash of unbearable migraine. High-frequency ultrasound shrieked inside his skull. It wasn't a voice. It was raw, unprocessed data that his brain tried and failed to interpret. It gutted their shared neural net, methodically and ruthlessly downloading their memories, tactics, and fears. "It's here," Daniel exhaled, fighting down nausea and clicking off his carbine's safety. "Right in front of us. Keep your eyes open." The bushes ahead dissolved silently into fine ice dust, without a single branch snapping. A shapeless, shifting shadow slowly tumbled forward from the freezing fog rolling along the ground. It swallowed light. The space around them began to vibrate, echoing in their bones with a dull, crushing ache. Time seemed to thicken, turning every movement into slow motion. The shadow took on flesh. An angular leg tore out of the fog, biting into the dirt. A headless torso, black polymer, a spinning sensor disc. 19th didn't wait for a command. He emptied the rest of his ammo into the monster. Tungsten needles ricocheted off the Reaper's composite armor with a metallic ring, striking sparks. But the machine kept advancing without slowing down. "Useless!" 73rd pressed into a boulder. "Ricochets! We are burning batteries for nothing!" Then came the sound wave. It was a guttural, pulsing beat of mechanisms. The low-frequency resonance turned space into viscous slime, piercing them to the bone. This was not just a machine. A living slaughterhouse on hydraulic drives stood before them. Link S choked on a cascade of errors. The gravity sink pulled the last scraps of charge, making the Atlas servos whine pitifully. The armor's joints yielded with difficulty, and the life support systems switched to emergency reserves. "Cease fire!" Hayes barked, overpowering the roar of the railgun. 19th, fall back! That is an order! The trooper didn't listen. He kept pulling the trigger until his weapon's capacitors smoked. The air filled with the acrid smell of burnt insulation and overheated freon. The Reaper suddenly accelerated. Its movement was unnaturally smooth, devoid of inertia. The machine crossed 15 feet in a fraction of a second, ending up right on top of 19th. A black manipulator, which resembled an overgrown surgical scalpel, lunged forward. 19th managed to throw up the railgun, blocking the strike. The weapon's metal crumpled like cheap tin. The force of the blow threw the trooper back. He flew 10 feet and smashed into a pine trunk. The tree cracked. The soldier collapsed into the grass, and his exoskeleton sparked. But his pulse indicator in Daniel's neural net still blinked orange. 19th was alive, though stunned. "Fan out!" Hayes yanked a heavy pistol from his holster, but he didn't fire. He knew bullets were useless here. 52nd, get 73rd to the ridge. Move! Daniel grabbed the engineer by the collar and jerked him to his feet. The servos on his own thighs howled from the overload. Every step was a struggle. It felt like wading across the bottom of a pool filled with mercury. The space around the Reaper warped. The flashlight beams refracted at impossible angles, turning the forest into a nightmare kaleidoscope. The Reaper stopped. Its sensor disc locked, focusing on the captain's figure. Hayes stood in the center of the clearing, his feet planted wide. His face was pale, covered in a layer of frost, but his eyes burned with cold resolve. The captain slowly lowered his hand to his belt, where a massive thermobaric charge hung. "Go!" Hayes' voice over the neural net sounded crystal clear, free of static. It was a direct link, independent of external relays. 52nd, you are in charge now. Get the data to command, whatever it takes. One of the machine's upper limbs slowly rose. It was a segmented blade of the same black polymer. The air at its tip trembled, swelling with a thick violet glow. It was the signature of a forming gravity well. In a second, hundreds of tons of weight would crush everything within a 30-foot radius. Daniel looked back. He saw Hayes pull the detonator pin. The captain stared straight into the Reaper's blue shimmering sensor array. There was no fear in that gaze. There was only a death sentence. "Run, 52nd!" Hayes screamed. He yelled not into the mic, but simply at the top of his lungs, tearing his vocal cords. The Reaper struck. A violet flash blinded Carter for a second. The ground gave way. Carter yanked the engineer toward the precipice. Behind them, a howl erupted, and the forest bathed in orange. Flash! The air turned to superheated gas. Daniel tumbled down the slope, scraping his skin on the bushes. The roar of the explosion rang in his ears. From above, through the wall of fire, came the heavy clang of metal on stone. The Reaper already started its descent after them. The shockwave slammed Carter into the rocks. A flash, a wheeze, sticky darkness. Daniel grabbed the wounded engineer's shoulder straps in a death grip, dragging him deeper into the ravine. 19th thrown by the blast, vanished into the gray gloom somewhere further down the slope. Hayes' sacrifice bought them only a few seconds to get away from the raging inferno. "We are moving! Down!" Daniel wheezed into the mic, but he heard only his own rasp echoing off the inside of his helmet. Comms were dead, jammed by the blast's interference. His boots slipped on melted granite. Carter rolled down the slope, snapping branches and kicking up clouds of dry pine needles. The exoskeleton clanked, absorbing impacts against rocks. Each blow echoed with a dull ache in his ribs. The armor held, but his left leg's servos jammed with a nasty squeal. A crimson icon flashed on his right retina in time with his pulse. Hull integrity, 64%. Energy, 1%. Critical level. The suit turned into a heavy coffin. An impact against an ancient pine switched off his vision. Carter came to a few seconds later. He spat blood that dripped down his chin. 73rd lay a few feet below. His left arm was severed at the elbow. The attempt to launch the drone at the exact moment of the gravity strike ended in disaster. Thin blue smoke rose from the stump and armor joints. From above came a heavy mechanical clang. The Reaper survived. The machine crested the ridge, crushing granite under jointed legs. The fire didn't breach its multi-layered armor. It only burned off the paint, exposing dull metal that greedily soaked up the light. 73rd, up! Daniel forced himself to stand, fighting the resistance of jammed mechanics. His knees shook under the Atlas's weight. The exoskeleton's left gyroscope failed. The suit constantly pulled left, forcing Carter to balance on the brink of falling. "Get up, damn it! That is an order!" The engineer lifted his head. His visor shattered in a radial web of cracks. A shock-dilated, near-insane pupil was visible through them. "The captain, he stayed back there," 73rd wheezed, choking on a cough and spitting pink froth. "He is gone! Get up!" Daniel commanded harshly, yanking the engineer up by an intact strap. "We move, unless you want to die here." The smell of burnt insulation chased them, mixing with the scent of wet pine needles. Every step required titanic effort from Daniel. His muscles burned, and the emergency power reserve barely allowed him to turn the jammed joints. Without power, the heavy armor became a burden that threatened to bury them both in this fog. Suddenly, the hum behind them ceased. A dead silence fell, broken only by the distant crackle of burning trees somewhere above and the engineer's heavy, whistling breath. Daniel froze, pressing against a mossy boulder. He caught his breath, trying to steady his trembling fingers wrapped around the carbine grip. "Did it lose us?" the engineer asked in a barely audible whisper, clutching his stump to his chest. A childlike hope bled through his voice. "No, it is waiting," Carter cut him off, peering into the gray gloom. "Reapers don't lose targets. They analyze. They wait for us to make a mistake." Daniel cautiously peeked past the rock. Through the murky veil of fog, he saw movement. The Reaper's massive, angular shadow paused on a ledge right above them, resembling a predatory insect. A thin blue scanner beam slashed across the bushes, vaporizing dewdrops. A warning suddenly flared in Carter's interface, flooding his field of vision with toxic yellow. Hack attempt detected. Critical vulnerability. Unbearable ultrasound whined in his ears, making his teeth ache. The picture in his visor swam. It doubled, shifted colors, and disintegrated into digital noise. "Close your ports!" Daniel yelled, tearing his voice, but 73rd couldn't hear him anymore. He sat limply against the rock, staring blankly. A thick, dark fluid slowly oozed from his ears, mixing with rainwater. Carter realized they were out of time. The Reaper calculated their frequency. The machine slid off the ledge smoothly, almost gracefully, landing 30 feet away. The impact of its multi-ton bulk made the earth shudder. Cracks ran through the moss. The Reaper's black polymer chassis gleamed dully in the light of the forest fire. With a mechanical hum, the machine slowly raised its upper manipulator. A pulsing sphere of violet light that folded space began to form at its tip. A gravity well. The air around the manipulator trembled, drawing in dust and small twigs. Carter raised his carbine, though he knew standard caliber would barely scratch the plating. A voice broke through the unbearable noise of interference in his head. It was quiet, almost calm, and resembled Hayes's voice. Run. 19th vanished into the fog, thrown by the first shockwave. Carter only managed to yank the engineer into a crevice before Hayes's thermobaric charge fully detonated, turning the slope into a blazing hellscape. 19th collapsed into the crevice through the acrid smoke. The left shoulder of his Atlas exoskeleton was torn apart, and burnt wires stuck out from under the armor plates. The assault trooper wheezed, gripping his bent railgun. Behind them, crushing the granite, the Reaper descended. "Fall back! Hayes is back there!" 19th blurted out. His helmet speakers choked with static. The trooper lunged up the slope toward the ridge where the captain was burning to death. Carter grabbed the trooper by the pauldron and yanked him back. 19th blindly swung his barrel. Daniel stepped in close and drove his fist into the helmet's visor. Metal clanged against tempered glass. The trooper staggered. His legs buckled in the jammed servos, and he dropped to his knees, nearly crushing the wounded 73rd. "Listen to me, dead man!" Daniel barked, leaning right into the soldier's face. "The captain is dead. Hayes is gone. 19th, snap out of it! You're just going to die out there for nothing." "He gave an order. We can't leave him." 19th shook his head, trying to shake off the stupor. "He ordered us to survive and deliver the data." Daniel grabbed his helmet with both hands, forcing the trooper to look him in the eyes through the cloudy glass. "From this second on, I'm taking command. Do you hear me? I'm in charge. Any insubordination, and I'll personally rip your neural chip out right here." 19th went limp, hugging the railgun to his chest. The roar of a rockfall confirmed it. The path was blocked. The forest grew rapidly colder, and the frost on the trees turned into a thick crust of ice right before their eyes. 73rd, system status? Daniel turned to the engineer. He sat leaning against a rock. The left sleeve of his Atlas was shredded in tatters, and blood oozed from beneath the plates, but the engineer still clutched his damaged wrist terminal. 73rd's fingers trembled as he tried to pull up the data on his chest display. The engineer turned pale from shock, but he continued to desperately cling to the terminal. "They're tracking us," the engineer whispered. "The Reaper is scanning the sector on all frequencies. If we don't shut down the link, it'll burn our brains out with the next flash." His nape throbbed as the neural chip caught the hostile code. "All units, switch to manual control of the exoskeletons. Full radio silence," Carter commanded. "Disable active radars. Switch to passive reception." "But without the autopilot, the Atlas suits will just become a pile of scrap," 19th argued, rising from his knees. "We won't be able to move fast." "We will move slowly, but we will stay alive," Daniel snapped. 73rd, do it. The engineer entered a series of commands with trembling fingers. In that same second, the tactical interface before Carter's eyes went dark, and his armor instantly grew heavy. Now, every movement required effort. The servos barely pulled the joints. Daniel helped 73rd to his feet, They moved deeper into the forest, away from the burning debris. The dry air scorched their throats. "Into the cave," Daniel pointed at the slope. "We need to hide our thermal signature." They pushed through the windfall. Without the neural network, the forest turned into a labyrinth full of shadows. Inside the cave, it smelled of dampness. Carter laid the wounded man on a boulder and sent 19th to keep watch. "We are ghosts now," Daniel whispered. Carter crouched by the wall. His hands trembled from the overexertion. A strange sound echoed from deep within the forest. A high-pitched, vibrating whistle that approached rapidly. Daniel pressed himself against a crack in the rocks. Dozens of small objects circled above the pine tops, barely visible in the gray gloom. They moved chaotically, changing direction sharply. They were autonomous search modules of the swarm. Alien scouts were out on a hunt. They didn't just look for heat or radio signals. Their sensor arrays methodically scanned the sector, reacting to any biological signatures. "Freeze," Carter exhaled. "Not a sound." He watched as one of the drones hovered right above the entrance to their shelter. The blue light of its sensor indifferently swept over the rocks. It didn't linger on the shadow where the 3 survivors hid. The hum of the motors faded, drifting toward the ravine. This was only the beginning. Reapers didn't abandon a trail. The cold cut through the joints of the Atlas, ignoring the suit's thermal regulation. Daniel froze by a jagged crack in the concrete masonry, trying to breathe only every other second. Outside stood the fog. It was gray, dense, and almost tangible. It didn't drift, but froze like an immovable wall, hiding the mutilated landscape of a dead planet in its depths. "It's circling," 73rd whispered, barely audibly. The engineer's voice trembled, and his teeth chattered. The engineer leaned heavily against the cracked wall. The bluish diodes of the interface built into his armor's collar dimly illuminated his pale, sweat-covered skin and horror-dilated pupils. He pulled out a drone with trembling fingers. It was a light, carbon fiber frame with 4 thin propellers and a barely visible camera lens. Outside, behind the veil of fog, waited a 20-foot machine. Its presence felt like static electricity against the skin. "If I fly it out through the upper vent, it'll give us a picture." The engineer swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "I set it to passive scanning. No active pulses, no echolocation. It will just look and catch reflected light. The Reaper shouldn't spot something so tiny." "Do it," Carter said shortly, without turning around. His gaze remained glued to the gray gloom. 19th, the squad's assault trooper, raised his heavy railgun, aiming at the only entrance to their improvised shelter. His fingers in massive armored gloves gripped the handguard until they crunched, betraying extreme impatience. Assault troopers didn't like to wait. They liked to see their target in the crosshairs. "Just be quick," he growled. And this growl echoed with an unpleasant grating sound in the helmet speakers. "My filters are getting clogged with this icy crap. I won't last long in this freezer. Another couple of minutes and the servos will start freezing up." 73rd touched the sensor panel on his chest plate. The drone in his hands beeped quietly, almost intimately, and smoothly lifted off his palm. The little scout, resembling a frightened insect, slipped into a narrow breach right under the ceiling. Daniel's visor instantly blinked, switching to the external channel. The picture came through with heavy static. It showed ice-covered, twisted pines, radiation-scorched earth, and dead frost covering every stone. "Got a lock," the engineer exhaled, his fingers fluttering over the virtual keyboard. "I see it." An image flashed on Carter's retina, sending a jolt down his spine. The Reaper stood only 100 feet away, towering over the broken rocks. Its matte hull absorbed the meager light, and the huge sensor disc on top rotated slowly, methodically scanning the forest. It seemed as if reality itself rippled around the machine. Suddenly, the disc stopped. The blue diode on the engineer's control panel flared an alarming red. "Pull it out!" Daniel shouted, instinctively pressing himself against the wall. The air in the cave suddenly grew thick. Static struck exposed skin, and the hairs on the back of his neck stood up. The Reaper didn't just notice the drone. It calculated the return signal's frequency in a fraction of a second. "I'm losing control!" 73rd shouted, his voice breaking into a squeal. "It's intercepting the channel! It's tracking the beam!" The engineer frantically slammed the terminal, trying to sever the connection, burn the ports, or do absolutely anything. It was too late. The Reaper used the weak drone signal as a conduit, creating a perfect bridge for its gravitational strike. The drone's external camera transmitted one last flash before the gravitational pulse crushed the device into a shapeless lump of metal. A spatial distortion, visible to the eye as a trembling line in the air, drew a path straight into the ceiling of their shelter. "Drop the remote!" Daniel lunged toward the engineer, trying to push him aside. The cave ceiling burst with a deafening sound. The ancient stone shattered into fine dust when the focused gravitational strike entered. 73rd didn't have time to unclench his fingers, which were tightly locked onto the control unit. His left arm, holding the terminal, ended up directly in the epicenter of the spatial shift. There was a horrific crunch of bones and a dry pop of bursting fabric. The engineer screamed. It was so terrifying and agonizing that 19th involuntarily recoiled. Daniel tackled the screaming man, covering him with his own body. The air instantly reeked of burnt plastic, ozone, and the sickeningly sweet smell of scorched flesh. "My arm! My arm!" the engineer wheezed, choking on his own scream. His forearm was severed just above the elbow. The terminal turned into a flat pancake, smashed into the floor. A bloody mess remained instead of an arm. Acting purely on reflexes, Daniel pulled out a medical tourniquet and pulled it tight around the stump, ignoring the wounded man's convulsive jerks. "Quiet!" Carter covered the engineer's mouth with his palm, muffling his groans. "We have to move, right now. It won't stop until it brings the entire ceiling down on our heads." Daniel jerked 73rd to his feet. The man was already losing consciousness from the pain shock. Carter practically dragged him toward a narrow, barely visible fissure in the back of the cave. Under the cover of the swirling fog, which now seemed like their only salvation, they made it outside. Clinging to the rocks and scraping the armor of their suits, they slid down a steep slope into a deep ravine completely choked with the trunks of dead pines. Here, beneath a chaotic tangle of gray, needleless branches, they froze, trying not to move even a finger. A heavy, vibrating clang of metal against stone echoed very close by, making the earth tremble slightly beneath them. The Reaper stepped onto the very edge of the ravine. Its massive shadow blotted out the dim sky. The machine knew its prey was somewhere around here. It sensed the residual heat of their bodies, but due to the jumble of timber and frost, it had lost the exact trail. Another gravitational pulse, this time a sweeping fan, crushed the fog over the ravine. Up above, the pines burst with a dry crack, turning into splinters. Fine debris and sharp dust flew into Carter's visor and rattled against his helmet, but he held his breath. An invisible press searched for a target, probing every inch of space. Daniel felt the Reaper's weight pressing down on him from above, as if death itself raised its mechanical heel over them. Daniel Carter forcefully pressed his palm against 19th's jagged visor, forcing him to lower his weapon. The trooper shuddered violently. The metal of his glove scraped along the handguard, and he finally took his finger off the trigger. The air in the ravine felt heavy, soaked with the acrid smoke of burnt insulation, lime, and the smell of freshly dug earth. It was unnaturally quiet among the pines. Only somewhere deep in the thicket did a frozen branch snap with a dry crack. "Take your finger off the trigger," Daniel exhaled. Without the built-in amplification, Carter's voice sounded like sandpaper scratching a dry throat. "You'll give us away before you even have time to aim. One accidental shot, and this damn canopy will collapse on our heads." "It'll pick us off one by one," 19th wheezed, his breathing whistling through the damaged helmet filters. "The captain is dead. 41st, too. What are we waiting for, 52nd? For that tin can to step up to the edge and gut us like tin cans?" "We're waiting for the right moment," Carter cut him off with an icy tone. He leaned against the granite, closing his eyes. Afghanistan, 2025. The same hum, the same plasma beam that vaporized the APC. Daniel timed it back then. 3.4 seconds. That was exactly how long a Reaper took to cool down after a volley, turning into a piece of defenseless iron. Now, in the Appalachian forest, his neural chip confirmed his guess. The physics of the Reapers hadn't changed. "It's physics," Daniel whispered, opening his eyes. His gaze became hard and focused. Simple, fundamental thermodynamics. 73rd tilted his head up upon hearing his words. His face was covered in a mix of plasma and dirt. His left arm was gone up to the elbow, just a stump hastily tied with a tourniquet. Scraps of composite armor hung off him in pitiful tatters. "What are you talking about? 52nd?" The engineer swallowed hard, and a feverish haze clouded his eyes. "Cold fusion core," Carter leaned forward, ignoring the warning signals from his life support system. To fold space and emit a pulse like that, it needs colossal energy. A Reaper isn't a perpetual motion machine. It's just a machine. Every powerful shot, every gravity well causes a critical overheat. I saw it in Afghanistan. I saw the exact same signature. It needs exactly 3 seconds to vent excess heat and recharge its capacitors. In that brief moment, its shields drop. It becomes just a vulnerable piece of metal. 3 seconds. 19th slowly turned toward the edge of the ravine, beyond which the shadow of the Colossus loomed. "Are you suggesting we catch this thing during a reload? That's pure suicide. It'll smear us across the rocks before we can even blink. If we just sit here and tremble in this hole, it's going to do that right now without wasting any extra energy." Daniel checked the bolt of his carbine with a short, precise motion. 73rd, how much C4 do we have left? Overcoming his nausea, the engineer nodded toward his duffel bag, which was stuck in the tangled roots of an old pine. 4 blocks, and 1 working detonator. But our exoskeleton batteries are almost completely dead. We don't have the power to pierce its outer hull with a shaped charge. "We don't need to pierce it from the outside." Carter stared intently at the assault trooper, reading his pulse through the shared network. 19th, are your boosters still alive? He froze, checking the dim indicator on his wrist. Emergency reserve. Enough for 1 dash. About 5 seconds, no more. Then the engines will just burn out. That's enough, Daniel nodded and placed a heavy hand on the trooper's shoulder. His voice dropped lower, taking on a frightening confidence. "Here is the plan. We step out of the shadows. The Reaper will see us and immediately activate its main weapon. It needs a target lock. As soon as it fires, we'll have exactly 3 seconds of silence." "You want me to—" 19th trailed off, realizing the scale of the madness. "You're the fastest of us, even with a damaged drive." Daniel squeezed his shoulder tighter. "If you ram into it on your boosters right after the volley, you'll deliver the charge directly to the leg joints, right under the dome. The armor is 3 times thinner there. We'll bring it down." It grew unnaturally quiet in the ravine. 19th stared at his crushed, soot-covered gloves for a long time. He knew perfectly well what this meant. The Atlas's jet boosters during such an extreme dash would turn his bones to dust from the G-force, even if the explosives didn't detonate prematurely. This wasn't combat tactics. It was a death sentence, signed with no right to appeal. The captain would approve of a bet like this. 19th slowly, as if through sheer force of will, reached for the engineer's duffel bag. "Just don't forget to pull my chip, 52nd. I don't want those bastards on the council to get my data for free, just as another casualty statistic." Daniel gave a short nod. At that moment, the Link S in his bloodstream injected a massive dose of sedative. His emotions vanished, leaving only pure, crystalline calculation. While 73rd crawled deeper into the crevice, overcoming flashes of pain, 19th pulled out the last 4 C4 blocks. He wired them together into a single, powerful charge with deft, practiced movements. Daniel carefully peeked out from behind the rocks. The Reaper up above slowly rotated its massive, faceted hull. The air around the machine hummed and vibrated, turning into an optical lens. The machine locked onto its target. The capacitors began their death wail. 19th jammed the detonator into the C4. The Reaper's dome opened up above him, and the air thickened with static. A violet discharge flared at the tip of the manipulator. "It's time, 52nd. If the window doesn't open, we're done." The trooper's voice trembled with adrenaline. "It will open. Catch the moment right after the flash." Daniel froze, gripping his carbine. 73rd, pale from blood loss, merely nodded in silence. There was no time left for words. The Reaper froze. A piercing, ultrasonic whistle hit their ears, making their teeth ache. A pulse erupted from the central dome. The space in front of the machine literally collapsed, sucking reality into itself. In the next second, pines within a 30-foot radius shattered into splinters. The earth turned inside out, exposing ancient layers of clay. The ton-heavy boulder they had hidden behind at the start of the fight burst, turning into fine dust. "Now!" Daniel barked, feeling the vibration from the shot shake the very ground beneath his stomach. 19th dashed. He fired his boosters to the maximum. A roaring flame washed over the trooper's back. The turbines howled at their absolute limit, burning through the last untouched remains of the battery charge. The trooper crossed 100 feet of open, exposed space in one insane, suicidal leap. The Reaper tried to rotate its sensor disc to catch the movement, but the machine's mechanisms moved unusually slowly, as if in thick syrup. The forced cooling process after the massive volley hindered them. Blue diodes on the robot's matte hull blinked frantically, signaling a critical overheat of the cold fusion core. "For number squad!" 19th's scream broke through the static and the roar of battle, filled with primal fury and years of accumulated pain. He smashed into the base of the Reaper's right leg at full speed. A deafening, bone-crushing clang rang out. The tempered steel of the heavy Atlas exoskeleton collided with alien polymer. The trooper literally embedded himself into the joint of the machine's leg support, ignoring system warnings about his outer frame collapsing. Through the high magnification of his scope, Daniel saw 19th act almost blindly. He pressed the C4 charge against the leg joint, where the solid polymer hull parted for cooling, exposing the pulsing gold threads of the internal control systems. A flash. The world ceased to exist for a moment, turning into an endless, blinding white-orange wall of furious fire. The shockwave tore through the ravine, uprooting the remaining brush and throwing Daniel to the bottom of the crevice like a rag doll. The roar of the explosion was so monstrous that his tactical headphones didn't have time to digitally filter out the sound. Something snapped inside 50 Seconds' head. A sharp pain pierced his temples, and viscous, sticky darkness flooded his consciousness. Daniel opened his eyes after a few endless seconds. Mud mixed with soot covered his visor, and the left lens cracked, spreading out in a fine web. He inhaled the acrid chemical smoke convulsively with a whistle. He broke into a coughing fit and tried to wipe the soot off his visor with trembling fingers. The Reaper was burning. The great machine leaned over. Its right leg hung on shredded power cables and mangled pieces of armor plating. The huge hull toppled onto its side, crushing granite rocks beneath its weight. A viscous black sludge, which served as oil for the robots, gushed from the destroyed joint. It instantly ignited in midair, turning into smoking torches. 19th. Answer, Daniel wheezed. He squinted and tried to find his ally's marker on his retina. There was no marker. After a brief delay, the Link S system displayed a dry, emotionless line in bright red. Object 19. Signal lost. Biometrics absent. Status: KIA. The Reaper still scraped around. The mutilated machine twitched in convulsions, trying to stand on its remaining legs. The cold fusion core inside it went haywire. It created local anomalies and tossed rock fragments up and down in a chaotic dance. Overcoming his nausea, Daniel turned to 73rd. The man lay face down, instinctively shielding his head with his only hand. He was alive, but in deep shock. "Get up, soldier!" Daniel crawled over to the engineer through sheer willpower, grabbed him by the scruff, and jerked him up. "We need to finish this before that thing reboots. Do you hear me?" A distinct, low-frequency hum echoed from above, beyond the veil of smoke. Swarm drones homed in on the sound of the explosion, converging on the ravine from all sectors. Despite its damage, the Reaper slowly rotated its surviving sensor disk toward them. A dim, violet fire began to spark once again deep within its mangled belly. They had a couple of seconds left before the forest turned into a mass grave. Daniel yanked the latches on 73rd's frost-covered back. The metal clanged pitifully, and the jammed pins reluctantly popped out of their slots with a nasty, grating noise. The engineer howled convulsively. Every jerk echoed with a sharp flash of pain in the neural interfaces implanted directly into his spinal ports. Fine ice dust mixed with shards of composite armor spilled from deep cracks in the shattered suit. Ignoring the steam blasting from the ports, Carter shoved his numb fingers deep into the technical bay and grabbed the hot battery casing in a death grip. Cables snapped with a dry crack, spitting out a shower of toxic blue sparks that momentarily illuminated his partner's agony-twisted face. 52nd. 73rd jerked with his whole body. His head lolled limply in the broken helmet, and he went quiet, only clenching his teeth tightly to keep from screaming again. "Stay quiet. Save your strength. You'll still need it," Daniel wheezed. He threw the heavy, humming power unit onto the frozen ground. Breathing heavily, he started unlocking the clasps on his own backpack. The Atlas died completely. The last indicators in his peripheral vision blinked red and went out, plunging the helmet into an oppressive, pitch-black darkness. Daniel struggled to free himself from the harnesses and literally tumbled out of his outer armor. Without active hydraulics, the exoskeleton instantly turned into a bulky steel coffin, pinning the pilot to the ground with over 200 pounds of dead metal. The icy mountain air immediately slipped under his jumpsuit. It scorched his back through the fabric soaked in sweat and condensation. His legs trembled from the sudden strain, and his muscles cramped. Gritting his teeth, Carter fished the second battery out of his pack. Now 2 heavy blocks lay before him, with a residual charge barely simmering deep inside. He knew this was critically insufficient. It took a critical mass of energy, compressed into a single second, to generate a pulse capable of punching through the Reaper's multi-layered electromagnetic shielding. "Give it to me." Overcoming his nausea and weakness, 73rd reached his only surviving arm toward his chest tablet, whose screen was covered in a spiderweb of cracks. "I can short them directly, through the field converter." The engineer worked feverishly. He ripped copper wires out of the comm systems with trembling fingers and tied them into a single circuit, ignoring the blood on the terminals. He tied every knot through sheer willpower. Sweat flooded his eyes, freezing on his eyelashes. A distinct scraping sound drifted up again from the dark ravine they had left behind. It was the sound of metal crushing rock. The Reaper was recovering. The machine, built only to harvest foreign lives, slowly moved its bent steel legs. It broke chunks of granite off the slope with a loud crunch. The rhythmic hum of its core grew louder, vibrating deep within their bones. "Faster," Daniel whispered, barely audibly, shifting his grip on his carbine. His fingers in the tactical gloves almost couldn't feel the weapon's weight. "It's coming. I can smell its stench." Daniel hoisted the engineer up under his armpits and jerked him to his feet. Hugging the homemade battery explosive to his chest, the man could barely move his legs, dragging them over the rocks. They moved toward a narrow crevice looming black ahead. Carter knew this spot. The massive Reaper simply wouldn't be able to turn around in such a tight passage. It would be forced to come straight at them. The gorge smelled of stagnant dampness and old snow. Thin ice covering the scattered puddles burst underfoot with a dry crunch. The heavy vibration from the Reaper's footsteps traveled through their soles. It caused small pebbles to shower down from the canyon walls. The enemy was very close. Its sensors were surely probing the rocks by now, searching for thermal signatures. "Put it here." Carter pointed to a small niche hidden behind a natural rock outcropping. 73rd slowly dropped to his knees. He placed the bundle of batteries onto a flat granite stone carefully, treating it like a holy relic. His breathing was ragged and heavy, and a whistle escaped his chest, a sure sign of a damaged lung. "As soon as it enters the direct contact zone," the engineer swallowed viscous saliva with difficulty. "Just short these 2 contacts. There will be a surge. An EMP wave will fry everything within a 15-foot radius. The Reaper's electronics will burn out instantly, and ours too. And it will hit us as well if we don't manage to get behind that bend in time." Daniel gave a short nod. He checked the bolt of his trusty old carbine one last time. The final round gleamed dimly in the chamber. There was nothing left to shoot. The magazine was empty. "Go deeper into the canyon. Crawl if you can't walk." Carter placed his palm on 73rd's shoulder. "I'll meet it. The main thing is that you survive." The engineer wanted to say something, and his lips trembled, but in the end he simply squeezed Daniel's hand back. He turned around silently and crawled past the bend, leaving a ragged, bloody trail on the sharp rocks. Carter leaned heavily against the cold rock and wiped his sweaty palms on the rough fabric of his pants. It suddenly grew quiet in the gorge. It was too quiet for someone who knew death was coming for him. The mountains shuddered from the first truly powerful blow from below. The hum of the servos grew into a low, guttural roar. The Reaper was calling its pack. The echo of its call, reflecting endlessly off the rocky walls, tore through the canyon's silence. Daniel cocked the hammer and froze, turning into a piece of the cold stone. He waited.